Today we're examining an article from The Athletic looking at a potential Montreal Canadiens rebuild and what some of their players might have for value on the open trade market. So we're going to go through that. We also have a lot more news when it comes to COVID interrupting the NHL season. Several more players added to the COVID protocol list. More teams shut down. Is an eventual league-wide shutdown inevitable? We'll discuss that coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some more news, most of which unfortunately isn't really all that great today. Several more players have been entered into NHL COVID protocol. We now have over 100 players in those protocols, and that does not include the several members of NHL staff that are also facing the same situation. The virus has really spread like wildfire through the NHL. And fortunately, though, for the most part, from what we're hearing, most teams are reporting that majority, if not all their players, are either asymptomatic or having very mild symptoms, not much worse than like a cold, for example, or a mild flu or something to that degree. So that part, for the most part, is really good. The vaccines do seem to be working and doing their job in that regard. So at least that's, I guess, the best positive spin I can possibly put on this. But we're now up to 5 teams shut down. We saw more games postponed, including 5 games that were originally scheduled for today, now postponed. The Flames are still shut down. You get the Habs, the Panthers, the Leafs, and the Bruins are now shut down. It's really starting to add up, and it's add up quickly here. The other issue that teams are running into is they're having a very tough time cap-wise to be able to call players up and put proper rosters on the ice. Some teams are having to play short. The NHL really needs to do something here if they're going to continue playing to make things more feasible when it comes to that regard. So give some exceptions when it comes to cap or call-ups and that kind of stuff, because this is getting to the point where it's kind of crazy. Now, we heard GM of the Red Wings, Steve Yzerman, make some comments, and he kind of got a little bit political, but I can understand the frustration that's building across the league. For the most part, nobody wants anybody to be sick. Nobody wants anybody to have severe symptoms or be deathly ill or anything of that nature. But like Yzerman said, why are we testing players that are not symptomatic at all? He said the high percentage of people, especially in his organization, are asymptomatic, which they understand. At the same time, can still spread the virus. So there is risk involved. But when nobody's getting it worse than like a bad cold or flu, he said that makes it, kind of a head scratcher in a sense, because back before COVID, the NHL would play. If players had the flu, nobody freaked out like this, right? Then they would kind of be up to the player if they were strong enough to play or not. If things got too bad, they would sit out. So it's just, I kind of understand the sentiment. I don't completely agree with everything he said, but I certainly don't really disagree with it either. We're getting to a stage in this pandemic, I think, where we kind of need to learn and figure out how to live with this. And, it just makes it hard. But at the same time, the NHL is also, they can't control everything here because a lot of it's up to local authorities, and they set the rules on what you can and cannot do when it comes to attendance and all that. Obviously, most of the locations, I think all locations now in Canada, I'm not sure about Alberta, but I know all the other ones, Winnipeg, Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, all have capacity limitations now. None of them are allowed to be at 100% capacity, so that's certainly not helping when it comes to revenue at the gate. It's just making things really, really tough. And the other part that I wonder if a league-wide shutdown is inevitable, even though you hear NHL insiders and reporters saying that the NHL doesn't seem to be interested in that. They want to have enhanced protocols, and they're trying to plow through this and get to the holiday break. But the part that's going to be tough here is even though they want to do that, eventually they're going to run out of players. Like, how many players is it going to be in COVID protocol before you have no choice? Do people want to buy NHL hockey tickets to watch American Hockey League and East Coast Hockey League players? Not really, right? So you're getting a very watered down product. Most teams out that are playing, I shouldn't say most, but a fair bit of them are getting a lot of call-ups. Like, they're still trying to play through this, and it's getting really, really tough. So ultimately, this is not going to be an easy scenario. I'm not convinced at this point we will see an NHL shutdown, but as each day goes by and the number of players in protocol keeps adding up, eventually they may not have a choice. I'm not really convinced it would be a prolonged shutdown if they did do it, but it's still a scenario that I think they have to consider. You'd have to think the Olympics at this point is pretty much not going to happen. I mean, the NHL has enough games now that they need to reschedule, and with all these players being entered into protocols and testing positive in the last week, you'd have to think that there's a real strong chance at this point that regardless of what the players think, that the NHL just might pull the plug on this, because they do have that option for a little while here longer before they make that call. They're trying their best to let the players go if they want to go, but it's starting to get to the point that they may not be able to do that, and we might see the NHL pull a plug. We'll see. It just seems really risky, in my opinion, and I will be surprised if NHL players continue to go to the Olympics, and then if they do, I won't be surprised if several decide to skip out on it and not go, so we might not see the same rosters that we kind of anticipated heading into the tournament. So it's just a mess right now overall. There's a lot of different opinions out there. It's hard to say who's right or wrong, because it's just, how do you handle this, right? It's a tough balance in keeping people safe, being able to live, be able to move on, try to get out of the pandemic when it's all, still kind of raging its ugly head here. So we'll see where this goes, but I would not be shocked if we do get to the point where we at least see a small league-wide shutdown. But we'll have to see how the next few days go before the NHL really seriously considers that. It sounds like they're trying to avoid it at all costs. I get it. It's a business. You don't want to lose any more money than you have to. But at this point, you might have a chance to reschedule these games later into the season, have better attendance, and it might actually be worth it financially, more so than having teams play with, reduced capacities and have not as many fans show up because they're not going to get to see many of their favorite players and so on. So we'll see where this goes. Now, a couple other quick little news items before we jump into the Canadiens article I want to take a look at, and the trade rumors around Montreal. We do have some news on the waiver wire. A couple of players, the Vancouver Canucks, they signed defenseman Ashton Sautner, who was with their organization already in Abbotsford in the American Hockey League, but he was only on an AHL deal. So when he's on an AHL only deal, you cannot be eligible to be called up. So they've now switched him to an NHL standard two-way contract. So he needs waivers for that. So he's on waivers, and he can be called up as soon as he clears. So obviously that's one player on waivers today, and the other one is in the Coyotes organization. Vladislav Provolnev, who's been playing in their AHL affiliate in Tucson, hasn't really been working out. He's expressed desire to go back and play in Russia, where he's from, and the Coyotes are essentially granting his wish. So this is not your standard waivers. This is unconditional waivers for the purpose of contract termination. So, pretty much a guarantee he clears and contract gets terminated tomorrow, and then he can sign in the KHL in Russia or wherever else he wants to play afterwards. But that's essentially them helping him since it's not working out and he prefers to go back and play at home. Now, as I mentioned, we have an article here in The Athletic I want to take a look at, which we know the Montreal Canadiens are having a tough season. We expect big changes. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot until we get closer to the trade deadline, and we'll probably see a bit more after that into the NHL offseason. Some of these contracts that they might want to consider moving will be tough to do during the season. So the article here is from Marc-Antoine Gaudin, basically looking at several of these guys. He's done his research around the league, talking to various NHL executives and scouts on what their opinions are as to what kind of return these players could possibly bring back to the Montreal Canadiens should they complete a trade. So one of the big ones he looks at early on here is Carey Price. Will Carey Price be moved by the Montreal Canadiens? I think it's something they need to explore. I mean, if they're going to go down the full road of a rebuild, if that's something they really want to do, and I think it's a real serious possibility here. We've seen Jeff Gorton do this with the Rangers, and he did a masterful job between what he was able to bring back in young assets and then the drafting and developing from there. And even though he's no longer ahead of the Rangers, look at where they're at here today. A lot of that is due to the work that he and John Davidson did during their tenure at the top of that organization. So it wouldn't be shocking to do. The main team mentioned here for Price is the Avalanche. The Avalanche are a team that obviously is lacking that starting star goaltender. Same sort of scenario as when Patrick Roy won it out of Montreal. Now, I know for Montreal fans, it's probably a sore spot given the fact that we could see another star goaltender go from Montreal to the Avalanche, and possibly, if he does, have a shot at a Stanley Cup. Now, there's no guarantee, of course, this is going to happen. This is just people's opinions, not necessarily, a rumor linking the teams as having trade conversations. But if Price is on the move, that makes a ton of sense for a team that he could go to and actually, have a shot at a cup. And, they might be able to make the absorption here. Now, Montreal likely would have to retain some salary, and there's a lot of term left, so that's not going to be any kind of easy deal to do by any means. But if they do this, they would get a better return. The return that was suggested here in the article was a first-round pick and a fairly high-end prospect. So you're looking at about 2 assets coming back, and the only reason it's not more is because of the money that the Avalanche, or anybody else for that matter, would have to take on. So will Price be traded? Not a guarantee. It's going to be tough to do. More than likely, if it did happen, I would say it's probably more likely in the offseason, but you really can't say for certain. However, like I said, expensive deal. Tough question. A lot of it's going to depend on his health as well. Obviously, he hasn't played yet this year, so a lot of question marks around Price in his future. But the Avalanche are the main team mentioned, and that's the potential return that executives feel he could fetch if they go down that road. Now, when it comes to the other goalie here, Jake Allen, of course, a lot of his future is going to depend on the price on the future of Carey Price. Ultimately, if they trade Price, they're not going to trade him as well. He's done a pretty good job being the starting goaltender in the absence of Price, and I think they would be content to run with him along with some of the younger guys they have, like Caden Primo and to a degree Montembeault in the organization here to be the main goalies. So to me, he doesn't get traded if they trade Carey Price, but if they try to maybe not move Carey Price, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense, but still, if they did consider trading Jake, there's a lot of teams around the NHL. If they get to a point later in the season where they're hard up for a starting goaltender because of injuries or whatnot, they might be willing to pay a hefty price, and it might be something they might need to consider. I mean, he comes with a lot of experience, a lot of playoff experience, a decent contract, and ability to be a starter, and they might be willing to give up a first-round pick or more to make the acquisition. So to me, they only consider that if Price is not moved and they are confirmed that they're keeping him for the long haul. But we'll see where that goes. Jeff Petrie is another name mentioned here. Of course, this is going to be a tough sell with the contract left at 3 years or 4 years, sorry, at $6.25 million after not having a great year. Will a team take a chance on him? Because obviously we've seen last year and before what he was capable of. And I think he can bounce back to that, but it's still a hefty contract and a lot of term to take that chance. So the articles kind of suggest that Petrie will be a very tough piece to move. It's, not pretty unlikely, and at best they're probably thinking like a second round or mid-round pick. Like, you're not going to get a lot. That would be a scenario where you would kind of just move them for the sake of freeing up the money. You're not getting a good return. But, ultimately that's not something that's going to be easy to do. It actually was 4 years counting this year. It's 3 more years beyond the current season at 6.25. Now, when it comes to a guy like David Savard, who they just signed as a UFA, he's got 3 more years at $3.5 million. Looked upon already as being a declining asset. Yes, he fit in nicely with Tampa on their route to a Stanley Cup, but he had a really small role in all of that, to be honest. Like, he did fine, but he wasn't playing to the level that he's expected to in Montreal. Not going to be scrutinized as much either, but, he certainly does not look like he's in the best of shape. He doesn't look like he's playing his best hockey, and looks like he's a little bit out of place, really, since he's left the Jackets organization, where he kind of flew under the radar as being a pretty decent top 4 right shot defenseman, but now it's already apparent that just like the Carl Alsner signing, and maybe not quite as bad as that, but it's not working out, and it's going to be very, very tough to do. And another defenseman they might be stuck with because of the contract here. So we'll see where that goes. Now, another D-man that will almost definitely be traded is Ben Chiarot, and he will be moved before the deadline. He's played well enough and has enough playoff experience that many feel a first-round pick is a real solid possibility. So Ben Chiarot will get a lot of interest. It's already been rumored before. There's at least 8 to 10 teams that have already kind of checked in a little bit on his services and will likely circle back and be willing to make that trade closer to the deadline. So Chiarot should be one of those players that's guaranteed to move for a good return. Gallagher is another guy I mentioned, and you know what? Surprisingly, a lot of these scouts and executives that he talked to for this article kind of think that they won't need to retain much, if anything, on this contract, that even with the term and the money attached to it, that Gallagher would be a player that a lot of teams, especially ones with cup contending aspirations, would be willing to pay the price for. They're not going to get a huge return. You're probably looking at maybe a first round pick, or maybe it's a second round pick along with a prospect. So you're probably looking about 2 assets in return. Hopefully it's a first rounder if you're Montreal, but it's a situation where he's a heart and soul kind of player, can add some grit and sandpaper. He's a former 30 goal scorer. He's got a fair bit of experience. He's signed for longer term and at a price that might not be the greatest for some teams, but if they're that close and they view him as being that piece to put them over the top, then I can see there being interest. But I think Gallagher is probably not likely going to be a deadline deal. That, to me, along with Price, would be more likely to be off-season trades if they can make it happen. Now, Jonathan Drouin, another player mentioned here, is a likely player they'll consider moving. He's got 1 year left at $5.5 million after this year. The suggestion in the article was, even with salary retention, they might only get a mid-round pick, probably like a third, fourth round pick at best. If he has a real strong finish of the year, maybe that can be upgraded to a second rounder, but that's as best as they thought that he will fetch a return for Montreal. So consider they gave up Mikhail Sergachev for him and how things have gone. That's certainly not great asset management long term. Obviously, situation where things have declined, but you couldn't really predict that things would end up where they are either. But Drouin's a good player, and I think getting him a fresh start somewhere else after obviously he had a lot going on earlier where he dealt with the NHL Player Assistance Program. It can be a tough market to play in Montreal. It can be tough on your mental health if things aren't going well. And he was very open about a lot of the struggles and things he was working on. It might not be a terrible thing for him to have a fresh start somewhere else and to see if he can get things back on track and become more of the offensive player that many thought he would be when he was drafted so highly, in our top of the first round there behind his former junior teammate Nathan MacKinnon not too many years back. Now, on to some other guys that are going to be tough to move as well. Yoel Armia and Mike Hoffman are both players I mentioned here. Problem is they got too much money in term here. Hoffman still has 2 more years where Armia's got 3. Armia's a good playoff kind of player. I can see there being interest, but at $3.5 million for those number of years, that's not going to be an easy contract to move. I know last year, obviously, he went into the playoffs as a pending UFA. If this was reversed and he was a pending UFA again, probably get a good return, for a playoff run, but he's not that situation anymore. So the same with Hoffman, hasn't had a ton of a chance to play in Montreal this year, came into the season injured, missed some time, and it's just not going great. So a couple more guys they might be stuck with here. So out of all these players, you're looking at probably Sherratt being the most likely to be moved. Durant and Gallagher probably decent chances they could be done probably in the offseason. And a lot of these other guys are going to be real tough, like Hoffman, Armia, Savard, Petrie. Jake Allen would have good value, but like I said, I'm not sure it makes sense to move him at this point. But if they did pull off a Carey Price trade, again, likely for the offseason, considering what kind of money he makes, but it's not going to be easy. So if the Montreal Canadiens really want to rebuild, another player too that I didn't write down here for comments on, but it was mentioned, was Tyler Toffoli, another guy. Could give you a decent return, but last year had a great year. This year, not so much. So you're selling low on a lot of these assets, and it's just not good for when you're trying to add many picks and prospects to build up for the future. So it's not going to be easy at all to do a rebuild. So even though it makes a lot of sense that it will be what's best, will they be able to execute it properly? What route will Jeff Gordon go down? Will they maybe try to do a few minor changes and do a bit of a reset? We'll see, but let me know what your thoughts are down below. Do you see many of these veteran guys being traded? Maybe just a few to kind of shake things up. What route will Gordon and the new GM take? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.